The name is Bond. James Bond.
Midnight engines whisper low, shadows moving where the neon glows, steel and fire, hearts that chase. Welcome to the Havana Race. Rises off the boulevard, chrome reflections cut like scars. Crowds are cheering unaware, there's danger hiding in the air. Cigarette smoke, velvet night, every move is do or die. Behind the wheel, no time to pray. You don't survive, you dominate. Feel the rhythm in your veins. Every second counts in this game. This is the Havana Race. Speed and shadows face to face. Engines screaming through the night, chasing ghosts in neon light. No escape, no saving grace. Every turn a deadly place. Cross the line or disappear in the Havana Race. Palm trees flicker past your eyes. Truth is buried under lies. One wrong move, the system breaks. This machine was built to take from the harbor to the streets. You can feel the tension peak. Every corner hides a war. You're not racing anymore. Hear the sirens far away, but they won't arrive in time to save. This is the Havana Race. Speed and shadows face to face. Engines screaming through the night, chasing ghosts in neon light. No escape, no saving grace. Every turn a deadly place. Cross the line or disappear in the Havana Race. Slow it down, feel the heat. Every heartbeat skips a beat. One last push, one last drive. Only one walks out alive. This is the Havana Race. Fire burning, no restraint. Engine screaming through the night, running straight into the fight. No escape, no saving grace. Fate is written in the chase. Win the world or disappear in the Havana Race. Engines die, the silence stays, but no one forgets the Havana Race. Midnight engines.
Part 1. The Cuban Night. Havana at night feels like a city suspended between eras. The streets glow with warm amber light reflecting off faded pastel buildings, their balconies heavy with history and the quiet conversations of decades long past. Music drifts through open windows, slow Cuban jazz, the rhythm of distant drums, laughter carried across narrow streets by the warm Caribbean breeze. Old American cars glide along the avenues like mechanical ghosts from another century, their chrome catching the light of neon signs that flicker lazily above bars and cafes. The air smells of tobacco, rum, sea salt, and hot engines. Inside the courtyard of the historic Hotel Nacional, the atmosphere is very different. Wealth and power have gathered here tonight. Palm trees sway gently above polished marble tiles, while waiters move between guests carrying trays of champagne and crystal glasses filled with dark Cuban rum. A small orchestra plays softly beneath a veranda lit by golden lanterns. The event is billed as an exclusive celebration of motorsport history, a glamorous gathering of collectors, engineers, and investors drawn from the world of Formula One. But appearances are rarely what they seem. In the center of the courtyard stand several racing cars displayed like priceless sculptures. These are not ordinary vehicles. Each one represents a different era of Formula One dominance. A red Ferrari from the early 70s sits beside a sleek black Lotus machine, its aerodynamic lines still whispering of speed decades after its last race. Nearby rests a silver McLaren, its polished bodywork reflecting the lantern light like liquid metal. To the casual observer, they are beautiful museum pieces, relics of a glamorous sport defined by speed, danger, and innovation. But to James Bond, they are something else entirely. Bond stands quietly on a balcony overlooking the courtyard. From this vantage point, he can observe everything without being noticed. A glass of dark rum rests loosely in his hand, though he has barely touched it. His attention is focused not on the drink, nor on the music drifting through the courtyard below. Instead, he studies the crowd carefully, his trained instincts quietly analyzing every movement and every conversation. Bond has learned over many years that the most dangerous people in the world rarely look dangerous. Tonight's gathering is filled with men who appear successful, respectable, even charming. Investors laugh as they discuss racing contracts and sponsorship deals. Engineers enthusiastically describe new hybrid power systems that promise to transform the future of motorsport. Journalists move through the crowd searching for quotes and photographs. Everything about the evening suggests celebration and optimism. Yet Bond knows that MI6 does not send him halfway across the world simply to attend a party. Somewhere within this courtyard is the reason he has come to Havana. Bond's gaze settles on a man standing near the Ferrari display. The man is tall, impeccably dressed, with the relaxed confidence of someone accustomed to command. His name is Victor Mendes. Officially, he is a billionaire entrepreneur who has recently announced the formation of a new Formula One team. His investment has attracted enormous attention within the racing world. Engineers from several top teams have reportedly joined his organization, and rumors suggest his company has developed revolutionary hybrid engine technology capable of redefining the limits of speed and efficiency. To most people, Victor Mendes appears to be the future of motorsport. To MI6, he is something else entirely. Bond watches as Mendes moves through the crowd with effortless charisma. Investors lean closer when he speaks. Engineers nod enthusiastically at his ideas. Photographers gather around him as if drawn by gravity. Mendes laughs easily, his voice carrying across the courtyard as he tells a story about the early days of Formula One racing. It is the laugh of a man entirely comfortable with power. Yet there is something about him that does not quite fit. Bond has encountered men like this before, men who understand that charm can be a weapon as effective as any firearm. A waiter passes nearby offering fresh drinks. Bond politely declines and continues watching the courtyard. From above, he can see small details others might miss. 2 security guards stand near the main entrance, pretending to monitor guest arrivals while discreetly scanning the crowd. Another guard leans casually against a pillar beside the Lotus display, though his eyes never stop moving. Their positioning is subtle but precise, suggesting a professional security team rather than the usual hotel staff. Interesting. Bond allows his gaze to drift slowly across the cars displayed in the courtyard. The Ferrari draws most of the attention from guests, its bright red body instantly recognizable even to those with only passing knowledge of racing history. Nearby, the McLaren gleams under the lantern light, its sleek aerodynamic profile hinting at the relentless pursuit of speed that defines Formula One engineering. But the car that interests Bond most is positioned slightly apart from the others. It is newer. At first glance, it appears to be another historic display piece, though Bond quickly notices several inconsistencies. The carbon fiber bodywork lacks the small imperfections typical of museum cars that have survived decades of racing. The tires look fresh, almost unused. Even the brake discs reflect light with the subtle sheen of recently machined metal. Bond takes a slow sip of rum, masking his concentration. Then he sees it. A faint shimmer of heat rises from the rear of the car. The engine is still warm. Bond's eyes narrow slightly. None of the displayed vehicles should have been running tonight. Historic Formula One engines require extensive preparation before they can even start, and certainly no one would casually drive one into a crowded courtyard filled with wealthy guests, which means someone drove this car here recently. But why? Bond glances again toward Victor Mendes, who is now engaged in conversation with a group of engineers. They stand beside a large blueprint display showing diagrams of what appears to be a modern Formula One power unit. One of the engineers gestures enthusiastically at a specific section of the design, while Mendes listens with an expression of amused patience. The crowd continues to laugh and drink beneath the warm Cuban night. Yet Bond senses something shifting beneath the surface of the event. A quiet tension. The feeling that the evening's true purpose has not yet revealed itself. Across the courtyard, the warm engine finally stops ticking. Bond sets his glass down on the balcony railing. Somewhere in Havana tonight, a transaction is about to occur, one that has drawn the attention of British intelligence across half the world. And judging by the warm Formula One engine resting quietly among the historic machines below, the deal is already in motion. Part 2, the MI6 briefing. 2 days later, the warmth of Havana feels like a distant memory. London greets Bond with cold grey skies and steady rain. The city moves with its usual quiet determination, black taxis gliding through wet streets, commuters rushing beneath umbrellas, the Thames flowing dark and indifferent beneath its bridges. Bond's car passes along the embankment before turning toward the anonymous building that houses one of the most secretive organizations in the world. MI6 headquarters never tries to impress anyone from the outside. The building is deliberately plain, almost forgettable. Its true complexity lies beneath the surface. Bond moves through security with the quiet familiarity of someone who has done this countless times before. Identity checks, scanners, coded doors. The routine is automatic now. Within minutes, he is walking along the polished corridors toward the office that always feels slightly colder than the rest of the building. M's office. The door opens with a quiet electronic click. Inside, the room is dimly lit by the grey light filtering through tall windows that overlook the Thames. Rain streaks across the glass in slow patterns. Shelves of files line one wall, while a large desk dominates the center of the room. The air carries the faint scent of polished wood and old paper. M sits behind the desk, reading a document through thin spectacles. He does not look up immediately as Bond enters. Bond stands calmly, hands in the pockets of his coat, waiting. Finally, M sets the paper aside and removes his glasses. Bond, Havana seems to agree with you. Bond offers a faint smile. Warm weather tends to have that effect. M gestures toward the chair opposite the desk. Sit down. I'm afraid your holiday atmosphere is about to evaporate. Bond sits. M presses a button on his desk and the lights dim slightly as a large screen behind him activates. A satellite image appears first. The port city of Liverpool, its waterfront stretching along the River Mersey beneath a grey sky. Your friend from Havana, M begins calmly, Victor Mendes. On the surface, he's everything the racing world wants him to be. Visionary investor, innovator, the man who plans to revolutionize Formula One. The screen changes to show photographs of Mendes at various public events, press conferences, racing exhibitions, engineering demonstrations. He has invested nearly £2 billion into his new team, M continues. That kind of money attracts attention, but it also raises questions, especially when the technology involved is unusual. Another image appears. a digital blueprint of a Formula One hybrid engine. Bond leans forward slightly. Even without being an engineer, he recognizes the complexity immediately. Modern Formula One engines are among the most sophisticated machines ever built. Part internal combustion engine, part electrical generator, part energy storage system. Every component designed to extract maximum performance from minimal fuel. But something about this design looks different. Notice the electrical output figures, M says. Bond studies the numbers. They are enormous, far beyond what a racing car would normally require. That's not for a racing car, Bond says quietly. No, M replies. It isn't. The screen shifts again. Now it displays images taken from surveillance satellites, a warehouse complex along Liverpool docks. Cargo containers sit stacked beside old industrial buildings. From above it looks like an ordinary shipping facility, but one building stands out, large, recently renovated, and surrounded by discreet security patrols. Mendes Racing Headquarters, M says, or at least that's what they call it. Officially, it's a development facility for their new Formula One power unit. Unofficially, we believe it's something else entirely. Another image appears. This one taken from a long-range drone camera peering through an open loading door. Inside the warehouse sits a Formula One car. Not a historic machine like those in Havana. A prototype, black, aggressive. The kind of machine built not for nostalgia but for speed. Bond studies the image carefully. Two of them, M adds. The screen changes again, showing another photograph taken from a different angle. A second car sits nearby on a raised platform surrounded by engineers. The engines in these cars, M continues, produce electrical output far beyond anything necessary for racing, enough to power advanced military hardware. Bond looks back at M. Drones. M nods. Autonomous strike drones, to be precise. Our analysts believe the power systems developed for these cars could support a mobile drone launch platform, extremely fast, extremely difficult to intercept. Bond considers the implications. A Formula One car capable of launching drones while moving at racing speeds would be almost impossible to stop once deployed. A weapons delivery system disguised as a racing machine, Bond says. Exactly. The screen now shows a map of the Caribbean. Havana is highlighted. In 3 weeks, M says, Havana will host an international motorsport festival, a historic celebration featuring demonstration races and engineering exhibitions. Mendes will unveil his prototype car during the event. Bond watches the map quietly. The race itself is merely a distraction, M continues. Our intelligence suggests the real demonstration will occur during the event. The drones. Yes. M stands and walks toward the window overlooking the river. Rain continues to fall across the Thames. If the technology works as we suspect, he says, Mendes will possess the fastest weapons platform ever built, a system capable of launching autonomous drones at extreme speed. Imagine what that would be worth to the right buyer. Bond already knows the answer. Too much. M turns back toward him. That brings us to Liverpool. The screen changes again to show detailed surveillance images of the warehouse facility. This is where the prototypes are currently being assembled. Engineers arrive daily. Security has doubled in the past week. Something is nearing completion. Bond studies the photographs. There is something oddly theatrical about the entire operation. A glamorous racing team hiding a weapons program inside an old shipping warehouse. So, Bond says calmly, you want me to take a closer look? M returns to his desk. Yes, infiltrate the facility, determine exactly what those cars are capable of, and if possible, ensure they never reach Havana. Bond stands. The mission is clear now. From the warm courtyards of Havana to the cold docks of Liverpool, the pieces of the puzzle are beginning to align. Somewhere inside that warehouse sits a machine designed for incredible speed, and in the wrong hands, speed can be the most dangerous weapon in the world. Bond adjusts his coat and heads for the door. Behind him, the rain continues to fall across London, quiet, steady, and indifferent to the mission that has just begun. Part 3. The Liverpool Docks. Liverpool at night carries a very different energy from Havana. Where Havana glows with warm colour and music, Liverpool feels colder, harder, more industrial. The wind rolling in from the Irish Sea carries a sharp bite, and the clouds above the River Mersey hang low and heavy like a dark ceiling pressing down on the city. Sodium streetlights stretch along the waterfront, reflecting in long trembling streaks across rain-soaked asphalt. Bond's car moves quietly along the dock road. Old brick warehouses rise on either side of the street, their tall windows dark, their loading doors sealed with rusted steel. Many of these buildings once handled cargo from every corner of the world: cotton, tobacco, rum, timber. Liverpool was once the gateway to the British Empire, and even now the docks still hold the weight of that history. But tonight the area feels strangely empty. The occasional gust of wind rattles loose metal signs and sends scraps of paper skittering across the pavement. Somewhere in the distance a ship's horn echoes across the river. Bond slows the car as he approaches the location MI6 had identified. At first glance the building appears identical to the others surrounding it. A large industrial warehouse with faded brick walls and tall loading doors facing the water. A row of cargo containers sit stacked nearby, their dull metal surfaces streaked with rain. From the outside, nothing about the structure suggests anything unusual, which is precisely the point. Bond parks the car several streets away and continues on foot. The wind pulls at his coat as he walks along the dock road. He moves casually, hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed enough to appear like any late-night pedestrian. But his eyes quietly examine everything. 2 cameras mounted above the warehouse entrance, recently installed, a small security vehicle parked near the side gate, and a guard standing beneath the glow of a single lamp. Not the usual dock worker security. Professional. Bond continues walking until he reaches the edge of the building. From here he can hear something faint through the thick warehouse walls, machinery, precision equipment, the low metallic rhythm of tools working against carbon fiber and steel. He moves along the side of the structure, staying close to the shadows where the light from the street cannot reach him easily. Near the rear of the building, a secondary loading door stands partially open. Bright white light spills out onto the wet pavement. Bond pauses, then quietly slips inside. The interior of the warehouse is enormous. The ceiling rises high above rows of steel support beams, and powerful work lamps illuminate the center of the space with almost surgical brightness. The transformation of the old dock building is remarkable. Where cargo crates once stood, a fully operational Formula One garage has been constructed. Bond stops just inside the shadows and studies the scene. The floor has been covered with smooth black composite panels typical of professional racing garages. Equipment cases line the walls. Hydraulic lifts stand ready beside workstations filled with precision tools and diagnostic computers. Large digital screens display telemetry data and complex engineering diagrams. And in the center of the garage sits the machine that MI6 had been watching from space, a Formula One prototype. Even at rest, the car looks astonishingly fast. Its bodywork is formed from smooth black carbon fiber that seems to absorb the bright overhead lights. The aerodynamic surfaces sweep backwards with aggressive intent, every curve designed to slice through air with maximum efficiency. The narrow nose sits low against the floor, while the rear wing towers above the engine housing like a blade. Several engineers move around the car, their movements precise and efficient. None of them speak loudly. The atmosphere inside the garage feels focused, almost tense, like a laboratory where something extremely valuable is being assembled. Bond steps slightly closer, remaining just beyond the brightest lights. From here he can see the engine assembly exposed beneath the rear bodywork. It is unlike anything he has seen before. The hybrid power unit dominates the rear of the vehicle, a complex combination of turbines, generators, cooling systems, and energy storage modules. Thick electrical cables run from the engine to a set of large external battery arrays positioned beside the car. But what truly captures Bond's attention is the equipment connected to the telemetry system. Instead of standard racing computers, several consoles display targeting grids and satellite tracking data, military interface software. Bond studies the screens carefully. One display shows a series of small triangular icons arranged across a digital map of a harbor. Drone deployment markers. So MI6 had been right. This machine was never intended purely for racing. Bond circles slowly around the car, examining it from every angle. The tires are new. The brakes are massive carbon discs capable of withstanding enormous heat. The cockpit interior looks stripped down even by Formula One standards, every unnecessary gram of weight removed to maximize speed. Yet one detail confirms his suspicions completely. Mounted behind the engine housing are several compact cylindrical compartments integrated directly into the bodywork. Drone launch tubes. A Formula One car traveling at racing speed would be able to deploy dozens of autonomous drones in seconds. Fast, mobile, almost impossible to intercept. Bond is still studying the system when he hears footsteps behind him. A calm voice breaks the silence. "You're not one of the mechanics." Bond turns slowly. A woman stands near the entrance to the garage. She holds a racing helmet under one arm, her posture relaxed but alert. Her dark hair falls loosely around her shoulders, and there is a quiet confidence in the way she studies him. Her eyes move briefly toward the car before returning to Bond. "You've been examining that machine like someone who understands what it really is," she continues. Bond offers a faint smile. "I appreciate good engineering." She steps closer into the light. Her jacket carries the emblem of the racing team. "My name is Elena Vargas," she says. "Test driver." Bond glances briefly toward the car again before answering. "James." She tilts her head slightly, clearly unconvinced. "You're not here to drive." "No." Her eyes narrow slightly as she studies him. "You're here because of the drones." For a moment neither of them speaks. The distant sound of the wind rattling against the warehouse walls fills the silence. Finally, Elena sighs quietly. "I thought so." She walks toward the prototype car and rests her hand lightly on the carbon fiber bodywork. "When I joined this project," she says softly, "I believed we were building the fastest racing machine ever made." Her hand traces the curve of the rear wing. "But this isn't a racing car anymore." Bond watches her carefully. "What is it?" Eleanor looks back at him. "A weapon." She gestures toward the drone launch compartments. Mendes calls it the future of strategic mobility. Bond nods slightly. "And what do you call it?" Eleanor's expression hardens. "A mistake." Outside, the wind howls across the Mersey. Inside the warehouse, the black Formula One prototype sits silently under the lights. A machine designed for incredible speed, now waiting to become something far more dangerous. Part 4. The Plan. For a moment, the vast warehouse is silent except for the distant hum of electrical equipment and the soft tapping of rain against the high metal roof. Elena Vargas stands beside the prototype car, one hand resting on the black carbon fiber bodywork, as if she is trying to understand the machine she once believed in. The bright work lights above reflect across the smooth surfaces of the vehicle, turning its aerodynamic curves into sharp shadows that stretch across the garage floor. Bond watches her carefully. Years in the intelligence world have taught him to read people quickly. Fear, deception, loyalty, these things often reveal themselves in small gestures and subtle changes of tone. Elena does not appear frightened. She appears frustrated, perhaps even angry. The kind of anger that comes from discovering you have been used. "You said you thought this was a racing project," Bond says calmly. Elena nods slowly. "That's what we were told at the beginning." Victor Mendes approached several engineers and drivers from smaller racing teams. He promised something extraordinary, a completely new Formula One power unit, more efficient, more powerful, a machine that could dominate the sport for a decade. She walks slowly around the car as she speaks, her fingers trailing lightly across the carbon fiber panels. At first, everything looked legitimate. The design work was brilliant. The engine architecture was unlike anything we'd seen before. Hybrid systems that could recover and deploy energy faster than any existing power unit. Bond studies the exposed engine components again. Even to his untrained eye, the technology appears remarkable. But the specifications kept changing, Elena continues quietly. Every time we tested the system, the electrical output was pushed higher. At first, the engineers assumed Mendes simply wanted more power for overtaking. That's always been the obsession in Formula One, finding another few horsepower, another fraction of a second. She stops beside the rear of the car. But eventually the numbers stopped making sense. She points toward the battery array connected to the prototype. Those storage units can deliver enormous bursts of electrical energy, far more than a racing car would ever need. Bond nods slightly. And that's when the drone systems appeared. Elena glances toward the control consoles positioned along the side of the garage. At first they told us the equipment was for telemetry testing, advanced data analysis, but the software interfaces were wrong. They weren't designed for racing data. She pauses. They were designed for targeting. The word hangs in the air between them. Bond walks slowly around the car, examining the cylindrical launch compartments built into the bodywork. How many? He asks. Up to 30, Elena replies. Small autonomous drones, lightweight but heavily armed. Bond studies the compartments carefully. And they launch while the car is moving? Elena nods. At full speed. Bond allows himself a small exhale. That would make them almost impossible to intercept. Exactly, Elena says. She steps toward one of the computer stations and taps a key. The screen comes to life, displaying a simulation interface. A digital map appears, the outline of Havana's harbor rendered in glowing lines against a dark background. Bond recognizes the location immediately. Havana, he says quietly. Elena gestures toward the map. In 3 weeks, the city will host a historic motorsport festival. Vintage racing cars, engineering exhibitions, demonstration laps through the old streets. It's supposed to celebrate the history of racing. Bond studies the map more closely. Highlighted sections mark the route of a street circuit winding through the waterfront district. The race itself is just a cover, Elena continues. Mendes plans to unveil the prototype during the festival, a dramatic demonstration of his revolutionary racing technology. Bond watches as small icons appear on the screen. Drone flight paths. The car would begin the race normally, Elena explains. Thousands of spectators, television cameras everywhere, but once the vehicle reaches the harbor section of the circuit, she taps another key. The simulation shows the rear compartments opening. Small triangular icons burst outward across the digital harbor. The drones launch, she finishes. Bond studies the pattern carefully. What are the targets? Elena shakes her head slightly. That's the terrifying part. The drones could strike almost anything. Ships in the harbor, aircraft, even buildings. Bond folds his arms. A demonstration of power. Yes. And once the world sees what the system can do, every military contractor on Earth will want to buy it. The warehouse falls silent again. The prototype car stands between them like a black predator waiting to be unleashed. Bond finally speaks. Mendes isn't just selling racing technology. No. He's selling the fastest weapons platform ever built. Elena nods slowly. That's why I contacted someone in MI6. Bond raises an eyebrow slightly. You did? I didn't know who else to trust. Bond allows himself the faintest smile. Well, you chose the right organization. She looks at him more carefully now. You're not just an observer, are you? Bond says nothing, but the silence answers the question. Elena studies him for a moment longer before nodding slightly. Good. She shuts down the simulation screen. Because if we're going to stop Mendes, we don't have much time. Bond walks toward the prototype and looks down into the cockpit. The interior is incredibly narrow, a tight carbon fiber shell built purely for speed and efficiency. The steering wheel resembles something from a spacecraft, covered with switches and digital displays. How fast? Bond asks. Elena answers without hesitation. Over 350 kilometers per hour. Bond considers that. Fast enough. She looks at him curiously. For what? Bond glances toward the drone launch compartments. For getting to the drones before they launch. Elena studies him carefully. You're serious. Bond straightens. If Mendes wants to demonstrate the car in Havana, he'll need a driver. She smiles faintly. And you're volunteering? Bond looks toward the dark shape of the prototype machine. Let's just say I've driven faster things. Outside the warehouse, the wind grows stronger over the Mersey, rattling loose metal panels along the dock walls. Inside, a dangerous plan begins to take shape. In 3 weeks, the world will gather in Havana to celebrate speed. But if Bond and Elena fail, That celebration will become the opening moment of something far more destructive.
Part 5. The Cuban Grand Prix.
3 weeks later, Havana feels alive in a way few cities ever experience. The motorsport festival has transformed the old city into something extraordinary. Streets normally filled with taxis and vintage American cars have been closed and converted into a temporary racing circuit that winds through Havana's historic waterfront district. Tall safety barriers line the narrow roads, and grandstands have been erected along the Malecon, where thousands of spectators gather beneath bright Caribbean sunlight. The air vibrates with anticipation. Music plays from loudspeakers along the harbour, blending with the excited murmur of the crowd and the distant growl of racing engines warming up in the paddock area. Television crews move between teams setting up cameras, eager to capture the spectacle of powerful machines racing through streets that once echoed with the sounds of revolutions and old American convertibles. For Havana, it is a celebration. For Bond, it is something else entirely. The paddock area behind the starting grid has been transformed into a temporary Formula One garage complex. Rows of equipment trucks stand beside portable workshops where mechanics move quickly between cars, checking tires, adjusting suspension settings, and reviewing data screens glowing in the tropical heat. Bond stands beside the black prototype car. From a distance, he appears exactly like any professional racing driver preparing for a demonstration run. He wears the team's black racing suit, gloves tucked into the belt at his side, and a helmet resting on the workbench beside him. But beneath the calm exterior, his attention is fixed on the car in front of him. The prototype looks even more dangerous beneath the bright Cuban sun. Every surface gleams with polished carbon fiber. The aerodynamic fins and wing elements catch the light like the edges of blades. The tires, wide, soft, and perfectly smooth, are designed to grip the asphalt with immense force once the car reaches racing speed. Elena Vargas stands nearby, speaking quietly with one of the engineers. Her presence appears completely natural to the racing crew. After all, she is officially the team's primary test driver. But when she glances toward Bond, her expression carries a subtle warning. Everything now depends on timing. Across the paddock, Victor Mendes steps from a sleek black car and walks toward the garage with the confidence of a man who believes he is about to make history. Several journalists immediately gather around him, microphones raised, eager to capture his comments before the race begins. Mendes smiles easily as he answers their questions. "This technology represents the future of motorsport," he says loudly enough for nearby cameras to capture every word. "Our hybrid power system will redefine speed, efficiency, and engineering innovation." The journalists nod enthusiastically, scribbling notes. None of them realize how close they stand to something far more dangerous than a racing breakthrough. Bond watches Mendes carefully while pulling on his gloves. The man radiates confidence. Why wouldn't he? Within minutes, the prototype car will demonstrate technology capable of reshaping military power around the world, and millions of viewers will be watching. A race official walks through the paddock announcing that drivers should begin moving toward the starting grid. Engines ignite one by one across the garage area. The sound is thunderous. Modern racing engines scream with an intensity that seems almost alive, a mechanical howl that reverberates through the streets and bounces off the old colonial buildings surrounding the circuit. Bond lowers himself into the cockpit. The seat is tight, molded perfectly to hold the driver's body during extreme acceleration. The steering wheel locks into position with a solid metallic click, and the digital display flickers to life in front of him. Telemetry numbers scroll across the screen. Engine temperature, battery charge, energy recovery systems. Everything is functioning perfectly, too perfectly. Elena leans toward the cockpit for a final check. Her voice is calm but urgent. The drone launch system is integrated into the rear compartment. Once it activates, you'll see a warning indicator on the display. Bond nods slightly. "And Mendes?" She glances briefly toward the neighboring garage. "He'll be driving the second prototype." Bond allows himself a small smile. "Then I suppose this will be a proper race." The mechanics step back as the car rolls slowly toward the pit exit. Ahead lies the starting grid, a narrow stretch of Havana street lined with barriers and grandstands packed with spectators waving flags and cheering loudly. The energy of the crowd builds as each racing machine takes its position. Bond guides the prototype into its starting slot. To his left sits a classic Ferrari demonstration car driven by a former champion. To his right, a modern hybrid prototype waits quietly beneath the heat of the sun. Then another engine roars to life behind him. Bond glances briefly in the mirror. The second black prototype rolls into position several rows back. Victor Mendes sits in the cockpit. Even through the helmet visor, Bond can sense the man's confidence. The starting lights appear above the grid. 5 bright red signals. The crowd falls silent in anticipation. Engines scream as drivers increase throttle, ready to launch forward the instant the race begins. Bond grips the steering wheel. Inside the cockpit, the world narrows to a tunnel of sound and vibration. 3 lights remain, 2, 1, the lights vanish, and the Cuban Grand Prix explodes into motion. Cars surge forward down the narrow street, tires gripping the asphalt with violent force. Engines howl as drivers fight for position through the first series of tight corners. The circuit winds through Havana's waterfront district like a ribbon of dark pavement bordered by ancient stone walls and colorful colonial buildings. Bond accelerates hard. The prototype responds instantly, its hybrid engine delivering astonishing bursts of power as he rockets past 2 slower cars before the first corner. The sensation of speed is breathtaking. The car feels less like a machine and more like a living creature, every movement responding instantly to the slightest input from the steering wheel. The Malecon sea wall appears ahead. Beyond it, the Caribbean stretches endlessly toward the horizon, waves crashing against the rocks as the racing machines scream past. Bond glances briefly at the digital display. Everything remains normal, but he knows the moment is coming. Behind him, the second prototype moves steadily through the field. Victor Mendes is closing the distance. The race continues through Havana's narrow streets, engines echoing off the buildings while thousands of spectators cheer wildly from balconies and grandstands. To them, it is a spectacle of speed, a celebration of motorsport. But Bond knows the truth. At any moment, the real demonstration will begin. And when it does, this race will become something far more dangerous than anyone watching could possibly imagine. Part 6, the final chase. The race tears through Havana like a storm of metal and fire. Inside the cockpit, the world has narrowed to speed, sound, and instinct. The steering wheel vibrates violently in Bond's hands as the car surges past 300 kilometers per hour. The engine screams with a mechanical fury that shakes the narrow street, its hybrid system unleashing bursts of electrical energy that push the machine faster with every straight. Crowds blur past in flashes of color, flags wave, camera flashes explode. To the spectators, it looks like the greatest racing spectacle Havana has ever hosted. But Bond's attention is fixed on the digital display mounted in the center of the steering wheel. The warning light suddenly flickers, then turns red. Drone system, armed. Bond exhales slowly. So, this is the moment, he mutters. Eleanor's voice crackles through the radio inside his helmet. Bond, the launch system is activating. You've got less than 2 minutes. Bond glances in the mirror. Behind him, the second black prototype emerges from a corner like a predator. Victor Mendes has pushed his machine to the limit, weaving through slower demonstration cars with ruthless precision. The gap between them shrinks quickly. Then something else appears. 2 black SUVs burst onto the circuit from a side street ahead, their tires squealing as they force their way through the racing barriers. Security vehicles, but not race security. Mendes' security team. The SUVs accelerate hard toward Bond's car. Elena's voice returns over the radio. That wasn't part of the race. Bond smiles faintly. I suspected as much. The first SUV swerves sharply across the road, attempting to block the circuit. The second vehicle pulls alongside the track barrier, its rear window sliding open. A man leans out holding an automatic rifle. Gunfire erupts. The bullets strike the asphalt around Bond's car in a shower of sparks. The sound of the weapon echoes across the street, momentarily louder than the racing engines themselves. Spectators scream as security marshals begin forcing the crowd back from the barriers. Bond reacts instantly. He downshifts sharply and swings the car left, sliding past the blocking SUV with only centimeters to spare. The prototype's tires scream as he drifts through the narrow gap between the vehicle and the concrete wall. The gunman fires again. Rounds slam into the road just behind Bond's rear wing. "Someone's taking the race a bit too seriously," Bond says calmly. He downshifts sharply and swings the car left, sliding past the blocking SUV with only centimeters to spare. The prototype's tires scream as he drifts through the narrow gap between the vehicle and the concrete wall. The gunman fires again. Rounds slam into the road just behind Bond's rear wing. "Someone's taking the race a bit too seriously," Bond says calmly. He jerks the steering wheel right and slams the throttle. The hybrid power unit unleashes a violent surge of acceleration. The Formula One car rockets forward like a missile. The gunman's aim falters as the prototype vanishes ahead of the SUV in seconds. But the chase isn't over. Behind him, Mendes' prototype car appears in the mirror, closing rapidly. Then Bond notices something else. The drone launch compartments on Mendes' car begin to open. Metal panels slide outward along the rear bodywork. Small cylindrical launch tubes emerge. Elena's voice cuts through the radio again. "Bond, the drones are deploying." Bond glances back just long enough to see the first drone lift into the air behind Mendes' car. Small, fast, deadly, and more are coming. Meanwhile, the remaining SUV surges forward again, trying to box Bond in against the seawall. The gunman rises through the sunroof, weapon raised. Gunfire erupts once more. Bond reacts instantly. He slams the brakes. The sudden deceleration is violent enough to throw the SUV forward past him. Then Bond accelerates again. The prototype surges forward with astonishing force and slams into the rear quarter of the SUV. The impact spins the vehicle sideways across the track. The gunman loses his balance and the rifle clatters onto the asphalt as the SUV crashes violently into the seawall. Bond speeds past the wreckage. Behind him, the damaged vehicle explodes in a cloud of smoke and twisted metal. But Mendes remains close. The villain's prototype machine tears down the Malecon like a black bullet, drones launching steadily from the rear compartments as the car races toward the harbor district. Bond watches the sky ahead. Several of the drones are already moving toward the harbor. Ships sit peacefully in the water, unaware of the danger racing toward them. Bond tightens his grip on the wheel. "Eleanor," he says calmly, "I'm going to need a very clear road." Her voice answers immediately. "The cargo docks are ahead, straight line to the harbor." "Perfect." Bond pushes the accelerator to the floor. The prototype screams forward at maximum speed. The road opens ahead, a long stretch of asphalt leading directly toward the cargo docks. Behind him, Mendes' car follows relentlessly, drones still launching as the villain attempts to complete his deadly demonstration. The harbor grows closer. Bond sees the edge of the dock approaching. Then he makes his move. At the final moment, Bond activates the emergency ejection system and launches himself from the cockpit. The Formula One prototype continues forward without him, straight toward the edge of the dock. Behind it, Mendes' car follows. Seconds later, the abandoned machine launches into the air above the harbor. The explosion that follows shakes the entire waterfront. A massive fireball erupts over the sea as the prototype detonates, destroying the remaining drones in a brilliant burst of flame. Shockwaves ripple across the water. Burning fragments fall into the Caribbean as the screech of tires fill the air. Mendes and the second prototype go diving off the end of the pier and become swallowed by the water below. Bond looks over as his parachute deploys and a waiting speedboat approaches to pick him up. "I always thought he was a little wet," he smiles. The Cuban sky slowly returns to silence as Bond cruises into the distance, lighting a well-earned cigarette. Part 7. The Quiet Aftermath. Several weeks later, the world has returned to normal. At least, that is what the headlines suggest. News reports describe the Havana Motorsport Festival as an unfortunate technical disaster. A prototype racing vehicle suffered a catastrophic failure during a demonstration run, triggering a dramatic explosion over the harbor. Officials quickly assured the public that the situation had been contained and that no major damage had occurred. Most spectators remember the event as a frightening but distant spectacle, a moment of chaos that ended almost as quickly as it began. What the world never learns is how close it came to witnessing something far more dangerous. The drone program is gone, the prototype technology has vanished, and Victor Mendes has disappeared into the quiet machinery of international intelligence investigations. For most people, The story is already fading into memory, but for James Bond, the mission continues to echo quietly in the background of his thoughts. The sky above Liverpool waterfront is pale and overcast when Bond arrives. A cool wind moves steadily across the River Mersey, pushing long ripples across the dark water as ships move slowly toward the distant Irish Sea. The docks stretch along the shoreline, a mix of historic brick warehouses and modern glass buildings, reflecting the muted light of the afternoon. Liverpool has always been a city shaped by movement, ships arriving from distant continents, cargo flowing through the docks, people passing through on journeys that carry them far beyond the horizon. Today the waterfront feels calm, peaceful. Bond walks along the edge of the river, his coat collar turned slightly against the breeze. Seagulls circle overhead while ferries glide across the Mersey toward Birkenhead, their engines humming softly beneath the quiet sky. He pauses beside the railing overlooking the water. For a moment he simply watches the river. The mission is finished. The danger is gone. Yet the adrenaline of Havana still lingers faintly in his memory. The scream of racing engines through narrow streets, the flash of gunfire along the Malecon, the violent explosion that tore apart the prototype car above the harbour. It had all ended in seconds, but the consequences of failure would have lasted for decades. Footsteps approach behind him. Bond turns slightly. Elena Vargas walks toward him along the waterfront path. She wears a dark jacket against the wind, her hair moving gently in the breeze coming off the river. There is something calmer about her now, as if the tension that surrounded the Havana operation has finally lifted. She stops beside him and looks out across the Mersey. "So, this is where it started," she says quietly. Bond nods. The warehouse wasn't far from here. They stand in silence for a moment. A large cargo ship moves slowly down the river toward the open sea, its hull cutting through the water with steady determination. Elena watches it thoughtfully. "I spent 2 years working on that project," she says softly. "Every day believing we were building the future of racing." Bond glances at her. "Technically you were," she smiles faintly. "Not quite the future I imagined." "No." Another ferry passes along the river, its wake spreading across the surface like a long silver ribbon. Eleanor leans against the railing. "You know," she says after a moment, "when I first saw the prototype car in Havana, I thought it was the most beautiful machine ever built." Bond nods slightly. "It was impressive." "Too impressive." She looks down at her hands briefly before continuing. "Machines like that shouldn't exist outside a racetrack." Bond considers the thought. The world has always balanced innovation and danger in uncomfortable ways. Every new technology carries possibilities both extraordinary and destructive. The difference often depends on who controls it. Bond lights a cigarette. "Elena," Bond says quietly, "the technology itself wasn't the problem." She glances at him. "Mendes was." Bond gives a small nod. She looks back toward the river again. "Well, I suppose that chapter is finished now." Bond reaches into his coat pocket. He removes something small and places it on the railing beside her, a pair of black Formula One racing gloves. Eleanor raises an eyebrow. "You kept them." They seemed appropriate. She picks them up and studies the material thoughtfully. "You know," she says slowly, "if those engines had been used for real racing, they might have been unstoppable." Bond smiles slightly. "Perhaps it's better we never find out." She laughs quietly. The sound carries softly across the water. "You drive like someone who's spent a lifetime behind the wheel," she says after a moment. Bond watches the ships moving along the horizon. "I've had a little practice." Elena slips the gloves into her jacket pocket. "Maybe one day you should try the real thing." "Formula One?" She nods. "Without the drones." Bond looks out across the river again. The Mersey stretches toward the horizon where the water fades into pale grey sky. "Perhaps," he says calmly. They stand together for a few moments longer, watching the slow movement of ships and ferries across the water. Another mission completed. Another threat removed before the world even realized it existed. But Bond knows better than anyone that danger never disappears completely. Somewhere out there, another plan is already forming. Another machine is being built. Another enemy is preparing their move. The quiet waterfront offers no hint of the battles still waiting in the shadows of the future. Bond turns away from the river. "Elena," he says, "if you ever do build another racing car..." She looks at him curiously. "Make sure it's fast." She smiles. "Fast I can do." Bond lights up another cigarette. They walk along the Liverpool waterfront together, disappearing gradually into the afternoon crowd as the River Mersey continues its endless journey toward the sea. Part 8. The MI6 operation. Night settles slowly over London. The rain that had fallen through the afternoon has finally stopped, leaving the streets shining beneath the glow of yellow streetlights. Traffic moves steadily along the embankment beside the Thames, the dark water reflecting the passing lights of buses and taxis as the city prepares for another quiet evening. Inside a private room high above the river, James Bond sits alone. The room belongs to a discreet club not far from Whitehall, a place where diplomats, civil servants, and the occasional intelligence officer gather when conversations require privacy and discretion. The atmosphere is calm and understated. Dark wood panels, soft lighting, the faint scent of polished leather and whiskey. In front of Bond rests a glass of scotch that he has barely touched. The events of Havana already feel strangely distant. Missions have a way of fading quickly once they are completed, replaced by the steady rhythm of new intelligence reports and the quiet anticipation of whatever might come next. Across the room, a television plays silently above the bar. Bond glances toward it. A sports broadcast fills the screen. Formula One. The new racing season has begun. The camera follows a pack of cars racing through a sweeping corner somewhere in Europe. Engines scream as the drivers push their machines to the limit, each one searching for that perfect balance between control and chaos. Bond watches quietly. There is something hypnotic about Formula One racing. The speed, the precision, the way the machines seem almost alive as they carve through the circuit. For a moment he imagines the black prototype from Havana running among them, its hybrid engine roaring with impossible power, its sleek carbon fiber body slicing through the air faster than anything else on the track. The fastest machine ever built, a weapon disguised as a racing car. Bond lifts his glass slowly. Across the screen, a commentator's voice explains a new technological breakthrough being tested by one of the teams. Improved energy recovery systems designed to capture more power from braking and acceleration. Bond allows himself a faint smile. Technology never stops evolving, and somewhere, someone is always searching for the next advantage. A quiet voice interrupts his thoughts. "Still thinking about Havana?" Bond looks up. M stands beside the table. He holds a small folder under his arm, his expression calm but thoughtful. Bond gestures toward the empty chair. "Just watching the future of motorsport." M glances briefly at the television screen before sitting down. "I imagine after recent events the subject has acquired a certain personal interest." Bond takes a small sip of whiskey. "One might say that." M opens the folder and removes a single sheet of paper. "The investigation into Victor Mendes continues," he says quietly. "Several of his financial partners have already disappeared into various legal proceedings. The technology itself appears to have been destroyed." Bond studies the paper briefly. "And Mendes?" M closes the folder. "Still missing." Bond leans back slightly. Men like Victor Mendes rarely vanish permanently. They retreat, regroup, wait. "I suspect we haven't heard the last of him," Bond says. M nods. "Neither do I." For a moment they both watch the race unfolding on the television screen. One of the drivers attempts a daring overtaking maneuver, diving down the inside of a corner at incredible speed, while the crowd roars from the grandstands. The commentator's excited voice fills the quiet room. Bond sets his glass down. "Speed has always fascinated people," he says thoughtfully. "Why do you suppose that is?" M considers the question for a moment. "Perhaps because speed represents freedom," he replies. "The ability to move faster than danger." Bond glances toward the television again. "Or the ability to deliver danger faster than anyone can stop it." M smiles slightly. "That too." Outside the window, the Thames flows quietly through the centre of London, its dark surface reflecting the lights of the city as it has done for centuries. Bond stands and walks toward the window. Far below, traffic moves steadily along the embankment road. Cars, machines, speed in its most ordinary form. Behind him, M gathers the folder from the table. "One more thing, Bond." Bond turns. M places a photograph on the table. Bond studies it carefully. The image shows a racing garage somewhere in Europe. Inside stands a Formula One prototype, unlike any currently competing in the championship. The bodywork is dark, almost black, and the aerodynamic design looks aggressively experimental. Bond recognizes the shape immediately. Not the same car from Havana, but unmistakably inspired by it. "Where?" Bond asks quietly. "Monaco," M replies. Bond exhales slowly. The next race is already being prepared. M walks toward the door. "Enjoy your evening, Bond. I suspect you may not have many quiet ones left." The door closes softly behind him. Bond remains by the window for several seconds. Then he looks again at the photograph lying on the table. A new racing machine, a new experiment in speed, perhaps a new weapon waiting to be built. Bond finishes his drink. Outside, the London night continues its quiet rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, another racing engine roars briefly as a car accelerates along an empty street before fading into silence. Bond picks up the photograph and slips it into his coat pocket. The race, it seems, is far from over. Part 9, The Shadow in Monaco. The Mediterranean glitters beneath the late afternoon sun. From high above the harbour, Monaco appears almost unreal. A city carved into the cliffs where luxury rises layer upon layer above the water. White yachts fill the marina like floating palaces, their polished hulls reflecting the deep blue sea. The narrow streets twist through tall buildings and grand hotels, each corner steeped in decades of racing history. For most of the world, Monaco represents glamour. For James Bond, it represents something else, a pattern. Bond stands on the balcony of a hotel overlooking the harbour. From here he can see the famous harbour chicane, one of the most iconic sections of the Formula One circuit. Racing cars will pass through that tight corner in a blur of colour during the upcoming Grand Prix, braking violently before accelerating again toward the tunnel carved through the rock. Even when the circuit is quiet, the place feels alive with speed. Bond studies the harbour carefully. Dozens of yachts rest in the water, many belonging to wealthy racing sponsors, team owners, and investors who have gathered for the upcoming race weekend. Helicopters occasionally pass overhead, carrying passengers between the airport in Nice and the small heliport near the marina. Monaco always attracts powerful people, which makes it the perfect place to hide something dangerous. Bond turns away from the view and walks back into the hotel suite. The room is quiet and elegantly furnished, polished floors, large windows overlooking the sea, and a desk covered with several photographs and intelligence reports. M had not provided much information before sending Bond here. Only one photograph, only one instruction. Take a closer look. Bond spreads photographs across the desk. The first image shows the garage that M had mentioned in London. It sits inside a private testing facility on the outskirts of Monaco, a place used by several teams to test experimental technology away from the eyes of journalists. The second image shows the machine inside the garage. Bond studies it carefully. The car's shape is unmistakable: low nose, aggressive rear wing, carbon fiber bodywork. But there are subtle differences compared to the prototypes destroyed in Havana. The aerodynamic design is more refined, the bodywork smoother, the energy storage system slightly larger, which means someone has been improving the design. Bond lifts the photograph closer to the light. A small logo appears on the side of the vehicle, not a racing team, a technology company. Bond recognizes the name immediately, one of Victor Mendes's former investors. Bond sets the photograph down slowly. So the technology had not died in Havana after all. Someone had salvaged the idea. Outside, the distant sound of engines begins to echo through the harbour district. Bond steps back onto the balcony. Below him, a group of racing cars passes slowly through the streets during a practice demonstration. Their engines rumble deeply as they move along the famous circuit. mechanics following behind on scooters and small service vehicles. Crowds line the barriers. Tourists lean over balconies, everyone eager to witness the speed that has defined Monaco for nearly a century. Bond watches the cars carefully. Modern Formula One machines are astonishing creations, capable of cornering with forces that push the limits of human endurance. Their hybrid engines combine enormous power with incredible efficiency, delivering bursts of energy that allow drivers to attack corners with precision and aggression. But the machine in the photograph would be something different, not just fast, weapon fast. Bond turns as the door behind him opens. Elena Vargas enters the room carrying a small equipment case. "You weren't followed," she says immediately. Bond shakes his head. "No." She sets the case down on the table beside the photographs. "So this is where the trail leads," she says. Bond nods toward the image of the experimental car. Someone rebuilt the design. Elena studies the photograph carefully. Her expression tightens. "They've improved it." Bond notices the concern in her voice. "You're certain?" She points toward the energy system housing along the rear of the car. "The battery modules are larger. That means more power storage." "And more drones," Bond says quietly. "Exactly." She walks toward the balcony and looks out across the harbor. The Monaco Grand Prix is in 2 days. Bond joins her at the railing. Below them, the circuit winds through the city like a ribbon of asphalt between towering buildings. "Elena," Bond says calmly, "if someone wanted to demonstrate a new racing technology in front of the entire world, this would be the place." He nods. She folds her arms. "So what's the plan this time?" Bond studies the harbor again. Yachts, garages, team trucks, thousands of spectators, and somewhere within the maze of racing teams and engineers, a machine capable of turning speed into destruction. Bond smiles slightly. "Well," he says calmly, "it seems we're going racing again." Below them, the engines of the demonstration cars fade into the distance as the sun begins to set behind the mountains surrounding Monaco. The city glows with golden light, beautiful, dangerous, and somewhere in the shadows of the harbor, the next race is already beginning. Part 10, the Monaco Race. Morning arrives in Monaco with dazzling clarity. Sunlight spills across the harbor and climbs slowly up the tall buildings that surround the circuit. The Mediterranean glows deep blue beneath the sky, and the great yachts anchored in the marina sway gently in the calm water. But today Monaco feels different. The city vibrates with anticipation. Race day has arrived. From early morning, the streets have filled with spectators moving toward the circuit. Grandstands stretch along the harbor, balconies overflow with guests, and every cafe along the waterfront buzzes with excitement. Helicopters circle overhead carrying wealthy visitors from Nice, while television crews broadcast live coverage to millions of viewers around the world. The Monaco Grand Prix has always been the crown jewel of Formula One, a race where speed meets elegance, where danger hides behind glamour. James Bond stands on a rooftop terrace overlooking the harbor section of the circuit. From here he can see one of the most famous parts of the racetrack, the tight harbor chicane where drivers brake violently after exiting the tunnel before accelerating again along the waterfront. It is one of the most technically demanding sections of the entire championship, and the perfect place to hide something dangerous. Bond lowers the binoculars and studies the paddock area below. Dozens of garages line the narrow streets beside the harbor. Mechanics move quickly between equipment trucks and workstations, making last-minute adjustments to the racing machines before the start of the race. The atmosphere is electric. Engines roar as teams perform final system checks. Crowds cheer as drivers walk toward their cars. And somewhere inside the paddock, the experimental prototype waits. Elena Vargas joins Bond on the terrace. She carries a small tablet displaying several security camera feeds taken from discrete surveillance devices placed around the circuit. "I found it," she says quietly. She turns the screen toward him. The camera feed shows a private garage at the far end of the paddock. Inside sits the car. Bond recognizes it instantly. The design is unmistakable. A black prototype Formula One machine with aggressive aerodynamic lines and an enlarged energy system mounted behind the cockpit. The carbon fiber bodywork gleams beneath the bright garage lights. Several engineers stand nearby examining the vehicle, and beside them stands Victor Mendes. Bond studies the image carefully. So he survived Havana, Elena nods, and he rebuilt the car. Bond watches the technicians working around the prototype. How long until the race? 40 minutes. Bond considers the situation carefully. During the race, the streets of Monaco will become an enclosed tunnel of speed. Barriers and grandstands will lock the circuit in place, leaving very little room for outside interference. If the drone launch system activates once the cars reach racing speed, it will be almost impossible to stop. Elena studies the camera feed again. He's preparing the launch system. Bond looks back toward the harbor. Thousands of people line the barriers below. Tourists, race fans, families. None of them realize how close they are to witnessing a disaster. Bond turns back toward Elena. Then we intercept the car before it reaches full speed. She raises an eyebrow. You're entering the race again? Bond smiles slightly. Monaco would be a shame to miss. Below them, the roar of engines grows louder as drivers begin moving toward the starting grid. The race is about to begin. Minutes later, Bond moves through the paddock wearing the uniform of one of the racing engineers. The disguise allows him to pass quickly through the crowded garages where mechanics rush around performing last-minute adjustments. The noise inside the paddock is overwhelming. Engines howl, tools clatter, team radios buzz with instructions. Bond moves steadily toward the private garage shown in Elena's surveillance feed. The door stands partially open. Inside, the black prototype sits ready. Victor Mendes stands beside the cockpit speaking with two engineers. Bond pauses briefly in the shadows, then steps inside. Mendes looks up immediately. For a moment, the two men simply stare at one another. Recognition flashes across Mendes's face. "You," he says calmly. Bond smiles. "Good morning." Minutes later, Bond moves through the paddock wearing the uniform of one of the racing engineers. The disguise allows him to pass quickly through the crowded garages where mechanics rush around performing last-minute adjustments. The noise inside the paddock is overwhelming. Engines howl, tools clatter, team radios buzz with instructions. Bond moves steadily toward the private garage shown in Elena's surveillance feed. The door stands partially open. Inside, the black prototype sits ready. Victor Mendes stands beside the cockpit speaking with two engineers. Bond pauses briefly in the shadows, then steps inside. Mendes looks up immediately. For a moment, the two men simply stare at one another. Recognition flashes across Mendes's face. "You," he says calmly. Bond smiles. "Good morning." "I wasn't invited to the after party." Mendes suddenly pulls a pistol from his jacket and fires. The shot echoes violently inside the garage. Bond dives behind the prototype car as the bullet smashes into a rack of equipment behind him. Bond knows that in such a small space, Mendes will hit his target next time before he gets that chance. He leaps from the side of the car and punches Mendes. As he falls backwards, Bond jumps into the prototype. Outside the garage, engines roar as the cars roll toward the starting grid. The race is seconds away from beginning. Bond reaches into the cockpit and activates the ignition system. The prototype engine explodes to life with a terrifying scream. Mendes fires again, but the noise of the engine now fills the garage. Bond pulls himself into the cockpit and slams the accelerator. The car surges forward out of the garage and onto the circuit just as the starting lights begin to illuminate above the grid. Mendes leaps into a second prototype parked nearby and follows immediately. Within seconds, both cars are racing through the narrow streets of Monaco. The race has begun. Crowds cheer wildly as the two black machines rocket past the grandstands, their engines screaming louder than any other car on the track. But Bond knows the truth. This is not a race. This is a chase. And somewhere behind him, the drone launch system is preparing to activate once again. Part 11, the final showdown. The streets of Monaco explode with sound. Dozens of Formula One cars surge away from the starting grid like a pack of mechanical predators, engines screaming as drivers fight for position through the tight first corner at Saint-Devote. Tires smoke, brakes glow, and the narrow streets echo with the thunder of hybrid power units unleashing their full potential. But two cars stand apart from the chaos. Two black prototypes with gold detailing. Bond's machine rockets forward through the field, slicing between slower cars as he pushes the accelerator to the floor. The prototype responds instantly, its hybrid engine delivering violent bursts of power that slam him back into the seat. Behind him, another engine screams louder than the rest. Victor Mendes. Bond glances briefly in the mirrors mounted on the narrow cockpit frame. The second prototype is closing rapidly. Mendes's car moves with ruthless precision, diving between competitors as if they barely exist. The man is clearly an experienced driver, aggressive, confident, and utterly focused. Bond mutters quietly to himself. Persistent. The circuit curves upward through the streets toward the famous Casino Square. Spectators lean over balconies above the track while crowds pack tightly behind safety barriers. To them, this looks like an extraordinary duel between two experimental machines. But Bond knows the real danger hasn't begun yet. His eyes flick toward the display on the steering wheel. The system warning suddenly appears. Drone system, initializing. Bond exhales slowly. Right on schedule. Eleanor's voice crackles through the radio. Bond, the launch sequence has started. If he deploys those drones inside the city, I know. Ahead, the circuit plunges toward the legendary Monaco tunnel, a long concrete passage carved through the rock beneath the city. The cars enter it at breathtaking speed, engines echoing violently inside the confined space as the light shifts from bright Mediterranean sun to artificial yellow illumination. Bond accelerates harder. The prototype screams forward at over 300 kilometers per hour. The tunnel amplifies every vibration, every surge of power. Behind him, Mendes's car closes the distance. Then Bond sees it. The panels behind Mendes's cockpit begin to open. Drone launch compartments inside the tunnel. Bond reacts instantly. He brakes violently at the tunnel exit and throws the car into the tight harbor chicane. The tires scream as the machine dances through the narrow barriers, barely avoiding the wall as he regains control. Behind him, Mendes attempts the same maneuver, but Bond has forced him into a tighter line. The second prototype clips the barrier. Sparks explode into the air. Mendes fights to regain control, but loses valuable seconds. Bond accelerates again along the harbor straight. The yachts in the marina flash past on his left, while the grandstands erupt with cheers from spectators who believe they are witnessing the most thrilling moment of the race. But the drones continue to arm. Bond sees the launch indicator flashing red. He speaks calmly into the radio. Elena. Yes? I'm going to need to stop him before the next lap. Her voice tightens. How? Bond glances toward the upcoming section of track. The tight hairpin at the Fairmont Hotel, the slowest corner in Formula One. Very carefully. He brakes sharply and swings the car into the famous hairpin, the machine rotating almost impossibly slowly compared to the rest of the circuit. Behind him, Mendes enters the corner moments later. Bond suddenly cuts across the inside line and slams the brakes. The prototype stops directly across the narrow road, blocking the track. Mendes rounds the corner at speed and is forced to brake violently to avoid colliding with Bond's car. His machine screeches to a halt only meters away. For a moment, the two black prototypes sit nose to nose in the middle of Monaco's most famous corner. Engines roar. Crowds scream in confusion. Drivers behind them scatter through escape roads to avoid the obstruction. Bond removes one hand from the steering wheel and calmly reaches for the small pistol hidden beside the cockpit. Mendes does the same. Both men step out of their cars simultaneously. The roar of racing engines fades slightly as safety marshals scramble to clear the track behind them. The two men stand facing each other in the middle of the street. Gunfire erupts. Mendes fires first. Bond dives behind the front wing of the prototype as the bullet smashes into the barrier behind him. He returns fire. The shot strikes the bodywork of Mendes's car, ricocheting harmlessly across the carbon fiber surface. Mendes laughs coldly. You should have stayed out of this, Bond. Bond reloads calmly. You should have stuck to racing. Behind Mendes's car, the drone launch system continues to activate. The compartments begin opening wider. Bond realizes they are seconds away from deployment. He fires again. This time the bullet strikes the exposed energy module beside the drone system. Sparks burst from the damaged circuitry. Mendes's expression changes instantly. No! The prototype suddenly erupts in a violent electrical discharge as the hybrid system overloads. Bond dives back toward his car as the machine explodes in a burst of fire and shattered carbon fiber. The shockwave ripples across the street. Flames rise into the Monaco sky. When the smoke clears, the wreckage of the prototype burns quietly beside the harbor road. The drones are gone, the weapon is destroyed, and the race is almost over. Bond looks at the car he has been racing in. "Thanks for the ride, but this is my stop," he says. He lifts his gun and shoots at the energy system loaded onto the car as it too begins to burn. He walks towards Mendes, his gun raised high, before firing once into Mendes's temple. Now, the race is over. Part 12, Finale, Moonlight over Monaco. Night settles softly over Monaco. The chaos of the afternoon has faded into quiet conversation and glittering lights across the harbor. What had been the loudest day of the racing season has transformed into something calmer. Elegant restaurants filled with laughter, champagne glasses clinking gently, music drifting across the warm Mediterranean air. Official reports describe the events of the race as a mechanical failure during an experimental vehicle demonstration. The damaged prototype has already been removed from the circuit. Race officials insist that everything was handled quickly and safely. Most spectators remember the moment simply as a strange interruption during an otherwise spectacular Grand Prix. Only a very small number of people understand how close the city came to disaster. High above the harbour, on the terrace of a quiet hotel overlooking the marina, James Bond stands beside the railing watching the yachts below. The Mediterranean stretches endlessly into the darkness, the moon casting a silver path across the water that shimmers gently with every movement of the tide. Soft music drifts upward from one of the waterfront bars, while the distant hum of nightlife continues along the narrow streets of the Principality. Bond holds a glass of champagne in one hand and a cigarette in the other. The evening breeze carries the scent of salt and jasmine across the terrace. Footsteps approach quietly behind him. He does not turn immediately. "Eleanor," he says. She steps beside him and rests her arms lightly on the railing. "You always know when someone's coming." Bond smiles slightly. Occupational habit. Eleanor looks out across the harbour. Several yachts glow with soft golden light, while their reflections ripple slowly across the water. Beyond them, the Monaco skyline rises in layers of illuminated balconies and hotel windows. "It's strange," she says quietly. "What is?" "This morning the world almost changed." Bond studies the horizon. "It often comes closer than people realize." She glances at him. "You don't seem particularly surprised." Bond lifts his glass. "Experience." Eleanor laughs softly. The sound blends with the distant music drifting up from the harbor. "You know," she says after a moment, "I spent most of my life chasing speed." Bond raises an eyebrow. "That seems appropriate for a racing driver." "Yes," she replies, "but today I realize something." "What's that?" She turns toward him. "Speed isn't the most dangerous thing in the world." Bond studies her expression. "No? It's the people who decide how that speed gets used." Bond nods slowly. She reaches into her jacket pocket and removes the black racing gloves he had given her in Liverpool. "I kept these," she says. Bond smiles faintly. "I suspected you might." She slips one glove onto her hand and flexes her fingers thoughtfully. "Perhaps one day I'll build another car." Bond leans casually against the railing. "A racing car?" She nods. "One that's actually meant for racing." Bond raises his glass slightly. "I'd like to see that." The wind shifts gently across the terrace. For a moment neither of them speaks. Below them the harbour lights shimmer across the water like scattered stars. Elena studies Bond quietly. "You know," she says slowly, "most people who survive something like today would probably celebrate." Bond glances at her. "I thought this was the celebration." She smiles. "Perhaps it is." She steps closer. The warm Mediterranean air surrounds them as the sounds of Monaco nightlife drift upward from the streets below. Bond studies her eyes for a moment, then sets his glass down on the railing. Elena reaches up and gently removes his tie. "You don't look like the type who enjoys staying still for very long," she says. Bond smiles. On the contrary, the moonlight reflects softly across the terrace as she leans closer. For a moment, the world beyond the harbor seems to disappear. No engines, no missions, no enemies waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. Just the quiet warmth of the night and the distant rhythm of waves against the harbor walls. Bond places an arm around her and pulls her gently closer. The kiss is slow and unhurried, carried on the warm Mediterranean breeze beneath the silver light of the moon as they both sink to the balcony floor. Below them, Monaco continues its glittering celebration of speed and glamour, but high above the harbor, for the first time since Havana, James Bond finally allows himself a moment of peace. The mission is over, the race is finished, and for tonight at least, the world is safe.